strikes on southern Gaza today. A military official has accused Hamas of violating the ceasefire, claiming it has attacked Israeli troops. Now, two Palestinian eyewitnesses has said that fighting erupted in Rafah, in the southern part of the city, still under Israeli control, before the airstrikes followed. The Israeli official has stated that Hamas fighters had opened fire using snipers and a rocket-propelled grenade in an area east of the Yellow Line, calling it a bold violation of the ceasefire. The official did not confirm the airstrikes directly, but warned that such actions threaten regional stability. According to witnesses and media reports, Israeli aircraft has carried out two strikes on southern Gaza today. A military official has accused Hamas of violating the ceasefire, claiming it has attacked two Israeli troops. Two Palestinian eyewitnesses have said that the fighting erupted in Rafah, in the southern part of the city still under Israeli control, before the airstrikes followed. The Israeli official has stated that Hamas fighters had opened fire and are using snipers as well as rocket-propelled grenade in an area east of the Yellow Line, calling it a bold violation of the ceasefire. The official did not confirm the airstrikes directly, but has warned that such actions threaten regional stability. Now, for this discussion, we're joined by Sol Sadka. He's a security analyst and author, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Sol, for joining us again. Good to see you.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
Thank you. Sol, can you tell us a little bit more about what's the geographic location exactly of Rafah, and what do they mean when they say Yellow Line in Rafah?
Right. So the part of the ceasefire deal was that Israel would initially withdraw to a line that gave Israel and the IDF control of about 55% of the Gaza Strip, while the other 45% was under the control of Hamas. And the plan was, initially at the beginning of the ceasefire, they would immediately return all the living hostages, all 20 of them, which is what happened. And they were also within, I think it was 2 days, meant to return the bodies of 28 hostages that had either been murdered in captivity or that had been taken dead from Israel 2 years ago. They've released, if I can count correctly, approximately 10 or 12 of them, but around 16 of the bodies still remain. And only once Hamas has handed over all the bodies does the next stage of the ceasefire begin, which is meant to be the disarmament of Hamas. And after the disarmament of Hamas, then at that point there are further lines that Israel is meant to withdraw to. But the initial line gives the IDF control of 55% of Gaza, of the original size of the Gaza Strip. In truth, almost everything within the IDF zone of control has been destroyed in the fighting over the past 2 years. There's virtually no buildings standing in that area. And even within the Hamas-controlled portion of the Gaza Strip that remains under Hamas control, on the western side of this so-called Yellow Line, a large number of homes and businesses have also been destroyed. The devastation there is quite catastrophic, as is expected in urban warfare, particularly when the enemy uses every civilian structure as a potential booby trap site. So that's where we are, and the Hamas fighters are instructed to stay on the other side of the Yellow Line. There have been a number of instances already over the 4 or 5 days that the ceasefire has been in effect that have seen the IDF shoot and even kill Hamas operatives that were approaching the Yellow Line, which was demarcated. And it seems that there has been another one today on the southern part of the strip at Rafah. Rafah, if you recall, Rafah used to be a city that straddled the Israel-Egypt border, rather the Gaza Strip, Egypt border. Approximately a third of the city was on the Egyptian side, and 2/3 on the other side. When the Egyptians controlled, or rather when the Egyptians were occupying between 1948 and 1967, Rafah grew. And since both sides of that border were controlled by Egypt, it didn't really matter where the border was. But in the 80s, when Israel withdrew from the Sinai, it ended up that Rafah was split down the middle, with some of it in Egypt and some of it in Rafah. Now, because the city was like this, it became a site of smuggling. Almost all the arms that Hamas have and ever did have were taken across the Rafah crossing, or they were taken in tunnels under the Rafah crossing in that area. The Israeli army has been digging up, and still continues to dig up, hundreds of smuggling tunnels under that area. The Egyptians noticed that the fact that they had a border with Gaza was causing them terror problems, because every terrorist within a 1,000-kilometer radius was making a beeline for that very border to try and link up with Hamas. And so what they did in around 2007, and something they got almost no notice but is quite visible on the satellite maps, is they entirely demolished their side of Rafah. Approximately 20,000 people were displaced, and every single building was razed, and the area abutting the border with Gaza was turned into a 7-kilometer deep exclusion zone. The war has led to the remainder of Rafah on the Israeli side as well, essentially being reduced to complete rubble. There's almost no building standing in Rafah. And the IDF hold bases. They also hold humanitarian centers where people come to get food aid under the GHF program. And what seems to have happened, though we don't know the details, although I did hear the jets flying overhead about 20 minutes ago, so I figured things were heating up there again. What we do know is that some Hamas men approached the yellow line that they're not supposed to cross under the ceasefire agreement, and have been subjects of airstrikes. And I'm sure the details will emerge.
Yes, Sol, thank you for that thorough explanation for my question. And also, looking at today's news that has come in, there are still a lot of sticking points and challenges to this fragile ceasefire, but one of them is demilitarization of Hamas, right? How do you think, how is it going to be, and do you think there is any international power that can make sure that demilitarization, Hamas does demilitarize, or de-armament takes place?
It's a very, very sad time. It's what I've been saying since the ceasefire was signed, that once the hostages are released, Hamas will still exist in a very denuded form compared to what they were, perhaps down 90%. But that 10% is still sufficient to pose a threat, but a threat only to Gazans. They really have no way to project power across the buffer zone with Israel. 10,000 Israeli troops will be stationed around that line, around that yellow line, or whatever line is drawn to in future, in perpetuity, and that's not a problem for Israel. They have a standing army that can do that. But Hamas will remain if they are not disarmed. And the Gazan people who live there, 1.5 to 2 million people in the Gaza Strip, are now controlled by them. And they have everything to fight for. And the Gazan people do not have weapons to fight even the 10% of Hamas that remains. So Hamas has been reduced to what I call a Gazan people's problem. That's all they are. That's all that's left of them. And who is going to disarm them? Who is going to disarm them? Well, the IDF certainly has no interest in disarming them. They don't really care who runs the rubble of Gaza, as long as they have no ability to attack Israel. And I guarantee you that there are no Arab armies in the world who have the willingness, or perhaps even the ability, to go into Gaza and start fighting Hamas terrorists and losing their own troops. So who's going to do it? The Western nations aren't going to do it. The only nation could have defeated Hamas completely was the IDF. The IDF could have done it. And if the war would have continued for a few more months, that probably is what would have happened, and that would have led to the freedom of the people of Gaza, a genuinely potential for a what they call a free Palestine, in inverted commas. That unfortunately looks to me very implausible. I just don't see, when you game it out, how that will end up happening at this point. I don't see how. I got to tell you the truth. And to me,
Yes.
the things in Gaza, the future looks extremely bleak for them. I feel very sorry for the Gazan people, even though so many of them celebrated October 7th. I feel sorry for many of them because I don't see how they can get out from under the cosh of their Hamas rulers, who no one in the world right now has a sufficient motivation. There are motivations, but insufficient motivations to be willing to lose men fighting them, to remove them from their last vestiges of power. So it could well be what we'll see is a sort of North Korea situation where you have this small territory which everybody wants to leave, gradually becoming even more isolated. And it could continue for decades with perhaps no end in sight.
Totally.
Although I hope I'm wrong, and I hope there is some kind of way to break this impasse. But the ceasefire deal was always very vague, and it was always clear that once Israel got 90% of what it wanted, which is to get out its hostages and to make Hamas no longer a threat to them, that Israel had no motivation anymore to continue dealing with them. And then the question was going to be, who did have that motivation? And so far, it's becoming clear that the answer is really probably no one.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that analysis. Thank you very much, Sol Sadka, for joining us and sharing that insight as a security analyst.